Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network.
I'm Ryan.
I'm Amanda.
And we're your hosts.
We're a traveling couple and digital nomads taking you on our adventures as we explore locations, destinations, and careers.
Enjoy the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the World Wanderers podcast. We are excited that you're joining us for today's episode of the show.
Yeah, and today we are excited to be joined by Erin Carey. Erin is the founder of Roam Generation, a travel and lifestyle PR agency focused on helping brands and experts inspire curiosity and exploration through traditional PR done in an untraditional way. And that untraditional way is that Erin is living on a sailboat with her family, currently in the Mediterranean when we spoke, but also just going all sorts of places around the world, sailing, exploring, and running her company 100% remote from a sailboat.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. We actually got introduced to Erin because she reached out with some potential guests for the show. So some of the other guests that you've probably heard on the podcast have come through Erin's PR agency. And as we were chatting more and more, she's like, well, I actually run my business from a boat and I'm currently in Africa. Would that be a good fit for your show? And we were like, heck yes, that sounds really interesting and super awesome. And it was really a reminder for me that working remotely, people really have no idea if you're sitting in a suit or a dress behind a desk in a cubicle, or if you're on a boat in Africa. She runs her business from everywhere in the world and it comes across, just as professional regardless as where she is. So it was pretty cool to actually hear the story around this and how she got started with her business and all of that good stuff.
Yeah, and so we talk a little bit about what it's like to be working, traveling, and building a business from a sailboat and also just as a remote digital nomad style entrepreneur. If that's something that you're interested in, we have lots of episodes on the World Wanderers Insider talking about different people with different career journeys and how they're able to make travel part of their career. So if you're interested in that, you can go to patreon.com/theworldwanderers to find out more and get access to the World Wanderers Insider. Now, without any further ado, here is Erin.
Welcome to the podcast today, Erin. We're really excited to have you here with us today.
Hi, Amanda and Ryan. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. We're really excited to have you on the show today and to talk about your life, your lifestyle, your business, all that good stuff. Can you share with us and listeners where you're joining us from today?
I sure can. I am on a boat in Monastir in Tunisia in Africa. It's not the most common location to be coming in from, but we live on a boat and we sailed here recently. And Monastir is kind of a medium-sized town in Tunisia, which happens to be in Africa. So kind of cool.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We had another guest on the show that was in Tunisia, didn't we? Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was, it was like kind of during the height of the pandemic, he ended up getting stuck there and was living on like a boat as well. And just basically couldn't go anywhere because all the borders are closed.
Yeah, I did hear that quite a few people got stuck here. So luckily we haven't been. I think we're free to leave whenever, but because of, being Australian and the EU, the Schengen shuffle and visas and things, we can't go back to the EU for about another 5 weeks. But we're liking it here, so it's all good.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we'll definitely have to get into more of like boat life while dealing with a global pandemic, but maybe let's back up a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about, your travel story, what first got you into travel, all that good stuff?
Yeah, I've always loved travel. Well, from being a teenager, I think prior to that, it just wasn't even on my radar. We weren't a well-off family. We never traveled. We went on camping trips or local holidays, once or twice a year. But other than that, we never went overseas. So it wasn't even something that I dreamt of. That was until I think I was in probably year 10 or 11, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And I remember my mum suggesting, why don't you become a travel consultant? And I was like, oh, wow, that sounds really cool. So I went to TAFE and I studied travel, and what my first job was as a travel clerk. So slightly different. It was in the public service, and I was getting paid a lot more than I would have if I had been a travel clerk. So it worked out really good. And so then I spent the next 20 years, which is sad to say, but just slightly less than 20 years, working for the Australian government in various roles. But during that time, my husband and I decided that we loved travel. So we backpacked around Europe and Asia for 6 months. We went to South America for our honeymoon. We did the Kentucky tour around Europe, which I think a lot of young Australians do. So we had some really amazing experiences. And then we had kids, and our travel slowed down a little bit, but we still managed to go to Vietnam with children and Malaysia. And then it was kind of a very regular period in our lives. We both were working full time. We had 3 children, and we didn't really have any trips or anything planned at that stage. And we sat down one evening to watch Netflix. We didn't have anything planned to watch, so my husband just chose something randomly, and he happened to choose a documentary called Maiden Trip by Laura Decker. And it was about the youngest girl to ever sail around the world. And for some reason, that really resonated with both of us. We had never dreamt of buying a boat, never ever considered living on one. I did do some sailing when I was young with my dad, but it was in dinghies on an inland lake, so nothing like what we're doing now. And after watching that documentary, we pretty much decided straight away that we were going to buy a boat and sail around however much of the world we made it around. And for the next two and a bit years, we pretty much worked tirelessly towards that goal. And here we are now on the boat.
Wow. And so that was only 2.5 years ago when you guys had that thought, like it'd be incredible to go sailing.
Well, it was actually longer than that, because we had a break because of the pandemic. So we had the dream, or we watched the documentary in December of 2015. We left Australia in February of 2018. We were away for almost 2 years, and then we went back to Australia for 18 months. So that was quite a wake-up call. We went back to normal life. We went back to our old jobs because we both had leave without pay. So we stepped straight back into our old jobs. The kids went straight back to school. We were like in the thick of it, back in the rat race, as though we'd never left. And it was great for a little while, but after probably 6 months, we both started getting serious wanderlust, and we would look at our photos from the trip, and our heart would just ache. We still owned our boat, and it was just in storage in the Azores, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, little islands there. So we knew that our journey wasn't over, but we didn't know what it looked like going forward, or how we could afford to keep it going. I had started a business first time around, which is my business now, Rome Generation. But at the start of the pandemic, it was still just kind of like a side hustle. And then it all kind of worked out perfectly, really, because during the pandemic, those 18 months, it allowed me to really grow my business. And then now it's a PR agency that supports our journey out here on the water. So it worked out perfectly. And we also decided to sell our house and all of our possessions back in Australia as well. So now we really are free. Last time we were free, but we still had a mortgage and tenants and, things to deal with back home. This time we've pretty much cut all of our ties, obviously beside family, who we miss dearly, and our children really do miss their cousins, which is one of the hardest parts. But other than that, we are pretty free, and it's exciting, because if we decide that we don't want to keep doing this, we have options, which is nice, because boat life it's pretty tough, and it's not something I personally don't think you can say, I'm going to sail around the world, or we're going to be out here for 5 years, because you honestly just don't even know what's going to happen in a month's time, or like 5 years' time. So we just say that we're going to do it for as long as it's fun. And at the moment it's quite fun, but it's probably not perfect, because in the Mediterranean, and probably because of the coronavirus, there have been hardly any children. So my kids aren't having as much fun as they did in the Caribbean, where there were like kids everywhere. There were so many families living on boats in the Caribbean. It was like one big summer camp almost. Whereas here in the last 8 months, we've met one family. So it's definitely a lot more difficult this time around.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's lots to ask about based off that. But how old were your kids when you first started this trip pre-pandemic?
Yeah, the youngest was 3 and now he's 7. So looking back, no wonder our parents were worried taking a little 3-year-old on a boat who couldn't even swim. So I think they were like 3, 6, and 8 or something, 3, 6, and 7, around those ages. And now they're 7, 11, and 12. So they have spent quite a chunk of their life on the boat now, especially the little one. He doesn't remember a lot about home. Of course, once we went home, he, was able to get really close to his grandparents and cousins and everything again. But now that we're back out here, it's harder this time around because they're all so older. So they, they remember back home. They remember all their cousins. They remember friends, and it's harder to convince them that they'll thank me when they're older. And that's what kind of keeps me going, is that I, in my heart, believe that when they're adults, they'll look back and go, "That's so amazing what you did, Mum and Dad. Thank you for taking us on that adventure." But at the moment, they're kind of moody teenagers and they just complain a lot of the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of like the dynamics of childhood, right? It's just whatever you're doing is like the most normal, somewhat boring thing in the world, even if it's like the most exciting thing in the world, whether it's like your dad is like Will Smith or you're on a boat or you're living in Australia. Yeah. It's like, I want to be doing something else. But what were kind of the kids' thoughts, and like how did you kind of work through that dynamic? Because like, obviously if you're, don't have kids and you think, I want to go sail around the world, people are like, you just kind of do it. But when you have kids, like, how do you work through that dynamic? What did the kids kind of think of the idea? And like, when you actually kind of went to do it, what were they feeling?
Yeah, look, the first time around, because for the 2 years and 2 months leading up to our departure, we pretty much talked about little else. And honestly, that's kind of how you have to be to get this happening, because it is kind of such a monumental task to pull off. You have to be a little bit obsessed. And I guess we were. So we always just said to the kids, "Oh, when we move to the boat, or when we live on a boat." And so we spoke about it so much that it was just normal. Doesn't everyone just move onto a boat? So they were excited. They were, pumped. There were, a few tears at the airport, but nothing crazy. They didn't really miss any friends. They were excited to go. And then while we were there, like I said, there were kids everywhere. And so they were loving life. And honestly, it was pretty cruisy for the first 12 months because I hadn't started working at that stage. So I was just loving being a stay-at-home mum again. I mean, I had time off with each of them when they were born, but to have time off when they were a little bit older was nice, and especially being in a foreign country or in foreign countries. So my husband would often kind of work on the boat and do repairs and maintenance, and I'd take the kids out and we'd just go and explore and travel around, which was always lots of fun. And we had plenty of friends, so there was a really great community in the Caribbean. And then homeschool, obviously, I'm not going to lie, homeschool's an absolute nightmare. And we still, however many years I've been doing it now, I still haven't got it down pat. So hats off to you if you manage to get homeschool under control, but that's not something that we've managed. But it's funny because when we speak to other boat families, if homeschool comes up, the first thing they'll say is like, "Oh my God, what a nightmare." So everyone hates homeschool from, what I've discovered. Of course, there are families out there that probably love it, but don't feel bad if you also come to not like it, because it's so hard being your children's parent as well as your children's teacher. And we've got 3 boys. They're like rambunctious and full of energy, and they never sit still, and they don't want to be sitting down, even though it's literally only for 2 hours. They just 2 hours drags out to be half the day, honestly. So that's the biggest challenge, and probably the worst part about sailing around the world. I would say, I think my husband would agree with me.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm sure there's lots of parents listening who have gotten a taste of homeschooling over the last, 20 months or whatever we're into with this pandemic, with so many schools being closed down. And I think it's just interesting to recognize, what's for you, what's for your kids, and what's maybe not for your family. And it's nice to have like lots of different options. But I can definitely imagine having, 3 rowdy boys who don't want to sit, they just want to explore and stuff. It'd be hard to kind of navigate that.
Exactly. But in saying that, once, because I stressed the first time around, because I was in charge of doing homeschool the first time around, whereas this time my husband does it, and while I work and run my business, which is amazing. So I really hats off to him, because he's doing a very hard job. Last time the youngest didn't do school, so now he's got all three doing it. But we did stress the last time around, and when we went back to Australia during the pandemic, they were absolutely fine. They slotted in so easily, and they were so much more mature than their peers, which ended up being not such a good thing because they didn't fit in so well anymore. So they had to kind of bring their maturity level back down to fit back in with the children, which they managed to do after, 3 or 4 months. They settled back in okay. But I think that is what I would say to parents who are traveling full-time or world skilling, is that not to stress. They really are soaking in so much and learning so much that even just our everyday life is a learning curve for them. My sons know so much about geography and history and just the workings of the world and about social situations and different cultures. It is really a great opportunity. As much as homeschooling's challenging, it's also very rewarding.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's really cool to hear, that your kids are, kind of came back to Australia like more mature, and just to hear, how they're little sponges. And I think that's been our experience with experiencing like traveling families and having friends who travel with their kids, is like, their kids don't sit at like the kids' table. It's like they just sit with us and they just eat the food that we're eating. And it's kind of a different experience than one might get back home. Obviously, everyone chooses to raise their kids differently. But yeah, I've always found that like the kids I meet from, traveling families they always strike me as like more mature than when I go home and I just see like my cousin's kids or friends' kids and stuff like that. So definitely an interesting dynamic. And one of the things I'm curious about, so I'd love to hear like a bit about that prep time. So in between watching the documentary and actually setting out for your first sail, how did you guys go about like learning to sail, buying a boat, all of that type of stuff?
Yeah, well, I think one of the very first things we did was hire a coach. So I remember after we watched the documentary, we moved to the computer, Googled families sailing around the world. And I think one of the first few results that came up was a family called Sailing Totem, TOTEM. And they happened to have this new coaching product where they would coach families like us who wanted to go from zero to sailing, basically. So we pretty much hired them maybe within the first 6 months of preparations, and they were honestly worth their weight in gold. They had sailed around the world with 3 kids, and their children actually were around the same age as ours when they first started, and they were able to advise us on absolutely everything. I could email them a question about homeschooling, or what kind of rigging to look for, or do we want a spade rudder, or like we could ask them anything, and it was so invaluable. And I believe that they did save us a lot of money, because we almost bought the wrong boat. And thanks to their advice, we didn't buy that boat. We ended up getting our boat now, which is perfect and has been perfect for us. So that would be my number one advice, is to hire a coach, because you will get your money back 10 times over. So what else did we do? We kind of worked backwards. We weren't in a position to buy a yacht. We didn't have any savings. We had a big mortgage, credit card debt. We were just like your pretty much run-of-the-mill middle income family. So we started Googling how much the yachts. Literally, that's what we typed in, and we figured out that we wanted to save about $100,000 for a boat. So we had the ability to borrow some money against our mortgage, and we then decided, well, the rest that we have to save. And we also needed spending money while we were away, because we didn't plan on working for those couple of years. So we did all sorts of things to save money. And amazingly, we surprised ourselves by saving 85,000, and that was a figure that I never dreamt that we could have saved. But it was almost like the universe just conspired to make everything fall into place for us. Once we came up with the dream and we set our intentions, we spoke about it as if failure wasn't an option. So instead of saying, oh, if we go on the boat, we'd be like, when we go on the boat, or we'd speak about it with our family as though it was definitely happening. And they were so skeptical, like they laughed at us to start with. And even up until a few months before we left, no one believed that it would actually happen. It was just so ludicrous. So I think that helped as well. It opened our eyes to so many opportunities that we probably never would have noticed. But also having a goal that was not like such a crazy long amount of time. I think if you had told me I had to keep up the momentum and the pace that we were trying to save for 10 years, I would never have lasted, probably even 5 years. By the two-year mark, I was like, thank God we're going, because I'm just getting a bit sick of this. We had international students live with us. So at one stage, I think we had 2 or 3 living in our house, and I was responsible for looking after them and cooking for them and making their lunch and packing, sending them off to school or university. I applied for a promotion. My husband, I think, did the same thing. We adjusted all of our utility bills. We cancelled our private health insurance, which in Australia, it's different to America. It's not as critical because we still have free healthcare even without private coverage. What else did we do? We did so many things. Like we cut out all takeaways. We never went out for dinner. We were really quite boring for those 2 years, but we just didn't care. And because we were both on board at the same time, it kind of became easy. And it was almost like a game. How much money can we transfer? Or my husband would come home and say, oh, I saved $30 today. So we transferred it into the savings account, and it became so fun, like watching the numbers grow to get to a number that we just never thought was just physically possible for us. So I do believe that if you really want something, you'll be amazed at what you can figure out to make it happen. I think we sold, we sold a couple of cars. We only had cheap cars, so they didn't go much towards it. But we sold some like possessions around our house, which we didn't even miss in the end. And you hear that quite a lot as well, that once you do start to declutter, it's almost like, how much more can I get rid of? And then you start looking at your stuff or your possessions in a different way, and you start thinking, this is just an anchor. Why do I need like 4 vases and a bowl that sits on a table and this rug? Like, I really just don't need this stuff. Don't get me wrong, like I love shopping, I love clothes, makeup, shoes. I love my house to look nice. But during those 2 years, I was able to pretty much forget all of that stuff and just focus on if we don't need it for the boat, we don't buy it. And that kind of became our motto. So we just saved so much money, because you'll be astounded at how much you actually do spend just in everyday life when you're not kind of seriously saving for something.
Yeah, I think that's so inspiring. And it's definitely something we can relate to. We've heard from so many people similarly, where like whether it's sailing, traveling, kind of whatever it is you want to do, if you're just kind of like going by telling yourself like, I don't have the money to do this, like it would have probably been easy to be like, well, it would be great if we could do that, but we're not in a financial position to do it. But when you kind of like set your mind to it, for us, it was like, okay, we want to quit our jobs and go to South America and backpack, whatever this was, like 7-8 years ago at this point. But then once you kind of start doing that, and you can start thinking like, oh, if I say no to this coffee, that means, an extra lunch in Peru. And when I say no to this, it means this. But it's kind of crazy what can start to happen when you have that goal that you're really motivated to accomplish.
100%.
And so did you guys take any like lessons on how to, like, once you got your boat, did you guys take lessons on how to like use it, how to actually like sail with it, that type of stuff?
Yes. So sorry, that was a part of the question I forgot to answer. So I covered we got a coach, how we saved up all the money. So on top of that, we had to learn obviously skills on how to sail. So my dad was a sail instructor in little dinghies back when I was a kid. So we bought ourselves a trailer sailor, which was like a 21-foot boat. And he would just come out with us on the weekends and teach us how to sail, essentially. And so we just mucked around in that little boat. It was, it was only small, so it was quite forgiving. We made mistakes, and my husband re-rigged it, and I think we had to get new sails. So we had a good kind of taste of what owning a boat was like, obviously on a much smaller scale. But we loved it, and we didn't lose enthusiasm during those 2 years because we had that boat, and it kind of became our escape. And I learned to look forward to that every weekend, because when I went on the boat, I had to kind of disconnect. I couldn't work. I couldn't do housework. I just didn't have to worry about anything. And so it was just such a fun thing to do every weekend. So in addition to that, we didn't join, but we kind of participated in our local yacht club. They had, they call them beer can races or sailing around the buoys or whatever every Wednesday night. And we just volunteered and crewed on a couple of different boats. So one weekend, because we both had kids, because we had kids, one Wednesday my husband would go, the next Wednesday I would go, and we just tag team it. And my husband probably learnt more than I did. I found it quite daunting because they take it very seriously, even though it's just a social event. And these were massive boats, serious racing boats, and I pretty much sat on the rails a lot of the time. But still, my husband learnt more than I did, and even to this day, he knows a lot more than I do about sailing. But what else do we do? Besides that, we also went on a week-long trip from New South Wales up to Queensland. So we wanted to go on a real liveaboard boat and sleep on there for, at least a week, just to make sure that we even liked it. Because my concern was, what if we do all of this and we don't even like it? On paper, I maybe don't look like the kind of person that would even like this lifestyle. Like I said, I'm a girly girl. I like shopping. I wore makeup. I wore heels. Not particularly sporty or outdoorsy. So you kind of think, well, why would you even want to do this? But for some reason, I just love living on a boat. I think for me, it's the travel element. We get to travel to different countries. We get to arrive in foreign ports under the power of our sails and explore different places. Yes, I work, but at the end of the day, I can head off to the Medina and go shopping for spices, or, go and buy a wicker basket or something, because I'm in a different place every month or a couple of months, however fast we travel. So, yeah, I love this way of life. And for my husband, it's also amazing. He gets to use his skills by maintaining the boat. And I think that is something that you really need to ask yourself before you get into this lifestyle is one of at least the pair handy, because you really do need to be able to be like a Mr. Fix-It and be able to fix everything, because things on boats break all the time. You also have to be very resilient and not let that get you down, because it can get you down, having constant breakages and things not working, toilets blocked, things break, and it always seems to cost, like they call it a boat dollar. Boat stands for bring out another 1,000, because everything always seems to cost like $1,000 or more. So there's a lot of challenges to this lifestyle, but mostly the rewards outweigh the negatives or the cons. But often there will be a lot of cons in a row, and you just have to keep telling yourself that the good times are coming. They always come back, but it's not necessarily like amazing for 6 months straight and then you might have a bad day. It's kind of pretty even that there's quite a lot of challenges, but then the good times are actually like really amazing. So it balances each other out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And then so when you guys set out, I know you started in the Caribbean. Did you buy a boat that was already in the Caribbean?
We did. So we bought our boat sight unseen. So working with our coaches, he helped me vet all of the listings. So I'd go through all the websites. I'd look through and find boats that I thought were potentials. I'd send it to Jamie. He would say yay or nay. And we kind of went through that for maybe 4 or 5 months until we found a boat that was actually in Grenada in the Caribbean. And it just so happened that they were anchored in the next bay. So that was a complete coincidence. We decided to not even look in the Caribbean at that stage. We were like, let's just start in the Mediterranean so we can go in a straight line back to Australia. But somehow this boat came up on Facebook, and when I sent it to Jamie, he's like, I can literally go and inspect it for you. So he went around the next bay, did an inspection, sent us like video footage. We then got a surveyor to do, another formal inspection of the boat. And with those 2 people looking over it, we were confident enough to buy it. Whilst my husband was technically kind of savvy and had experience in mechanics and stuff, he didn't feel that there was anything that he could really add to the process at that stage. So we knew that if he was going to fly over there, it would have probably taken $5,000 out of our savings, and we just didn't want to waste that money. So we bought it sight unseen, which is risky, and you've got to be really careful. But I think because we had Sailing Totem there to look at it for us personally, it was like a calculated risk. And yeah, it just turned out to be an amazing boat, and it's all worked out really, really well. So it can be done. It seems like maybe a silly thing to do, but it's possible and it can work out well.
Yeah, for sure. That's really interesting to hear. And so then once you guys had the boat and you're ready to go, you flew as a family over to the Caribbean to meet your boat and start sailing?
Yeah, pretty much. We packed up our house, rented that out, got 2 years leave without pay from our jobs, and we just headed off on one-way flights to the Caribbean. And when we landed, we could smell like the smell of spices in the air and French pennies, and it was so warm, and we're just like, oh my God, this is amazing. And yeah, it was just amazing. Like, the Grenada is still, after all the places we've been since Grenada's still my number one. It was just such a special place for us. Maybe it was because it was our first place, because that's where we bought our boat, but I don't think so. I think it is just such a fabulous place. But we spent quite a lot of time there. For the first 6 weeks, our boat was in the yard on the hard, which means it was up on stands on land, and it needed quite a lot of work done to it, just a lot of superficial things, but it hadn't been in the water for, I think, 12 or 18 months. So, and also the survey came up with, I think there were about 65 things that needed fixing. I mean, on a boat, that's not that unusual. But what was unusual is that the insurance company expected us to fix every single thing before they would sign us off for insurance. I mean, your boat is just never completely repaired. So to have to repair every single thing on that list was pretty soul-destroying for my husband. He worked so hard for those 6 weeks in the boatyard. And then I think come 6 weeks, I pretty much rang them up begging, just saying, can we please just launch our boat into the water, splash it, and tie up to a mooring ball, and we'll just sit there until we finish everything off. But it's so hot in the boatyard. There are mosquitoes everywhere. We don't have running water. We don't have a toilet. We don't have cooking facilities. We've got 3 kids and we're living 3 meters off the ground. Every time we have to go to the toilet, we had to tie a rope around their waist and like one go down behind them, one go in front of them, and like lower them down the ladder, because it was just super dangerous being that high off the ground with a little 3-year-old. And we had heard of there being boatyard accidents where children had, got brain damage or died from falling off the boat onto the ground. So we were super worried about that. And thankfully, the insurance agency agreed to let us go into the water. So once we got in the water, we sat still, I think, for another 6 weeks while he finished off the rest of the job. And I remember one day sitting in the cockpit, and I think I was over everything. We hadn't had really any of the good times yet. It had all been hard work. Nothing was working. I had 3 little kids. I don't think the fridge was working still. Everything was hard. To get to the shop, we had to all load into the dinghy, drive to the dinghy dock, lock the dinghy up, walk to the shop, or you actually walk to the bus stop, get on the bus, get off the bus, walk to the shop, do the shopping, and then do everything in reverse to get home. And it was just incredibly hot over there. So I remember sitting in the cockpit and I burst into tears and just said, oh, this is so hard. This is not what I had in mind. This sucks. And then I looked up and, no joke, a stingray like flew through the air, just jumped out of the water, went through the air, landed back in the water. And I just kind of started laughing and went, wow, okay, well, that just can't be a coincidence. That's got to be a sign just to suck it up and keep going. And that's just, I think that those feelings, and then knowing that you've just got to get on with it. It's often, you might feel like that way out in the ocean. It's like you can't turn the boat around. You can't stop. You can't turn it off and say, I want to get off now. You just have to keep going. And that's probably taught us a lot more than we realize. And it's probably a really good skill now that we've got, is to just get on with things or just get shit done kind of thing. That's kind of how you have to be out here, or you won't survive.
Yeah, for sure. That sounds like quite the adventure to start off. Like, definitely not like puppies and rainbows and all the things. Like, sounds like quite a bit of work and quite a bit of stress. And did you feel at any point like maybe we've made a bad decision, or maybe we should just like scrap this whole idea, like sell this boat, not do this? Or where were you guys kind of at, I guess, mentally during that process?
Look, I don't think so. Luckily, because we were both on board, there was never any or any hard feelings towards the other one. And I know that can, if the husband wants to do it more than the wife or vice versa, it can cause problems down the track, because inevitably there is going to come a time where you're like hot and sweaty and seasick and just feel like absolute crap. And you just probably want to say to your husband, whose idea was this? You know, this is your dream, not mine. Thankfully, neither of us could say that to one another because we both wanted to do it. And so I think it's the fact that neither of us fell out of love with the boat at the same time. There's probably been times where we have both at different times felt over it, but it usually comes back. So I think if we are to ever sell the boat, it's got to be for a sustained period that we're both like, yep, we're done. Because like I said earlier, the good times always come again. So even though at the moment we're kind of in a bit of a kid drought, the kids are kind of bored here. There's no English speaking children. There's not a lot for them to do. I know that once we get to Italy in 5 weeks, that there are a ton of children in the marina there, because we've already booked the marina. There's an online Facebook group. I've been like stalking everyone and saying, are you definitely going to be there? How old are your children? Please don't leave. Like, we need friends. So there are going to be kids there. So it's like, I'm pretty sure once we get there, the community that we need is going to be there. The friends that we need are going to be there. And I'm sure, hopefully, for the following 4 or so months, however long we stay there during winter, that we'll be back to loving boat life. And that's just kind of how it goes. But in the Caribbean, it was, besides the few hard times right at the start, most of it was pretty idyllic, because we had buddy boats, so boats with kids that we would sail to other islands, and we made really good friends from all around the world. And there was a lot of like community and a lot of organised activities. So the kids would have movie nights or craft making activities, or one of the parents from a boat would take the kids for a science lesson on the beach, or there'd be yoga for the adults, and cocktails on various boats every night. And so it was a lot of fun. And so I think that's why this time around the kids are kind of like, this isn't what we signed up for. we want friends. So I don't blame them. But I think that's boat life. And that's what I say, hashtag boat life, because whenever something's gone to shit, it's just something to laugh about and go, gotta love boat life. If you don't laugh, you'll cry, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine there'd be some tough times with 3 boys on a boat if they're all bored and lacking for other kids to spend their energy on. And so for you guys, when you were starting back out, getting ready to go back out again after being back in Australia during the pandemic. What kind of inspired you to start thinking about starting a PR agency?
Well, I'd already started it prior to arriving back home. And the way that came about was that I'll back up it even further. Prior to going out on our adventure, to keep inspired and to pretty much learn a lot of what we learned, we would watch YouTube channels pretty much every night about different people sailing around the world. And so there are actually thousands of sailing YouTube channels out there. They kind of sound boring, but they're really not, because it's not just about learning how to sail. It's about people living on a boat and traveling the world and having adventures. So they're super inspiring. And one of our favorite channels was SB Delos. And so we would watch them. We knew them like they were our friends. We kind of idolized them like they were famous people, even though they were just YouTubers to us. We watched them every night. And so you can imagine how excited we were that when we arrived into Grenada, SB Delos were also in Grenada. And I knew that we would bump into them somewhere because it's not a very big place. So for the first week or so, I would just, like, every time we went to the supermarket, I'd keep my eye out for them. And as it would happen, we did end up bumping into them in the supermarket, and they were super lovely, gave me their WhatsApp number, invited us to go hang out with them on the beach later that day. And a couple of weeks later, I sent them a text and just said, hey, we're launching our boat today. It would be super amazing if you could come. I know you probably don't have time, but just putting it out there if you have time. Anyway, so they all rock up. There were 4 or 5 of them in the crew at that stage. And yeah, so when we launched our boat in the water for the first time, SB Delos were there with us, kind of cheering us on, and that was amazing. And then they happened to be sailing up the island chain, as everyone kind of does. There's pretty much a set route that you go on. And so we kept bumping into them up and down the island chain. And after maybe 8 months of being out there, I started thinking, well, first of all, we were going through money faster than we expected, but also I felt like I wanted more of a purpose. So I was racking my brain, what can I do to earn money? I'd worked for the government for so long. I had skills in communication and report writing and interviewing, but I never considered myself to be a good writer. I was keeping a Facebook page, and I still do, and I kept getting told, I love your writing, you should write a book, or you should write for magazines or something. And I didn't pay much attention to that because, like I said, I'm a terrible speller. I just didn't think that would be something I could do. But after a little while, I thought, you know what, we pulled this off. What else can we do? I think that that's the great thing about when you achieve something really big, you really do become, I don't know, a little bit fearless, and your goals kind of don't feel so scary anymore. And so I thought, okay, well, I'm going to become a writer. And that's what I did. I started selling my articles to magazines all around the world. And I think I've been published, 80 or 100 times in different magazines. And at one stage, one of the magazines that I was writing for asked me to interview SB Delos just for an article in their magazine. And so I went on board their boat, which was amazing because this is the boat that we'd been watching, and got to sit there and interview them for 2 or 3 hours. And after I wrote the article and submitted it to the magazine and it was published, they reached out to me and just said, hey, would you work for us? And that was a serious pinch me moment to have SB Delos, who for us were our idols, ask me to work for them. And so they asked me to do marketing, and I essentially started doing PR for them without really realizing what I was doing was called PR. And so I would write articles about them. I would pitch magazines for stories, suggesting story angles, and I would try and arrange collaborations with other YouTubers. And after a little while, I was like, you know what, I really like this and I'm actually really good at it. So I pursued it more. I studied it. I have done a whole stack of work with different coaches and mentors since. And I started my own PR agency, and now I've got my PR agency called Rome Generation that we now work for like travel, leisure and luxury brands. And I've got contractors that work for me completely remotely in different parts of the world, and our clients are also completely remote in different parts of the world. So it's like a 100% remote business. I believe it's the only remote PR agency that's run from a yacht in the world. And it's super cool. I get to live on a boat, travel the world, spend time with my family while also running this dream business that's in travel, because that was my goal from, that time back at school when Mum suggested, why don't you work in the travel industry? And but at the same time, I get to be an entrepreneur and be really creative, and it kind of fulfills me in a lot of ways out here, when it could be kind of isolating otherwise. That I've got my business and it's a lot of fun. And I just feel like I've been so fortunate really to have created this. Obviously it's taken a lot of hard work, but I just want to inspire other people to not limit themselves, I suppose, and really go after things even if they seem a bit crazy or a bit ridiculous, because I don't like to, but I do say that I think that I'm just pretty average. So I'm not extra intelligent. We weren't extra rich. We just made it happen. We just figured out a way and made it happen. So I feel like if we can do it, a lot of other people can too. I'm not going to say everyone, because I realize that we're obviously privileged. We're Australian. We have a lot of opportunities that a lot of people from other countries don't have. But I really do think that even if you're just a middle income earner, it is still possible to do crazy big things like this.
Yeah, that's really inspiring to hear. And it's so cool to hear how it kind of started, very organically, working for, doing some work for, kind of your idols, and then just growing and growing. I know you mentioned that you had kind of started this and then you guys went back to Australia during the pandemic. So were you keeping Rome Generation kind of going on the side while you were working full time during those months that you were back in Australia, and then went into it full time after, or kind of how did that go?
Yeah. So when we got back, I kept Rome Generation going. I would go to work during the day and then run my business at night. And I did that for as long as I could sustain it, because I knew that we needed as much money as possible to get back to the boat. I think I lasted about 7 months. And by that stage, I had grown my business. It was going pretty well, but I was nervous. My job for the government was a good job. I got decent money. I had a lot of benefits. And I was scared to quit, basically, because what if I failed? And the day that I quit I remember my boss, because we were working from home by this stage because of the pandemic, she emailed me and said that the cells in the spreadsheet, I'd made the wrong color. And I'm just like, are you kidding me? We've lived on a boat, we've sailed across the Atlantic Ocean, I've been responsible for our life or death, and this is just so tedious and below me. I know that sounds really weird, but I just couldn't do it anymore. And my husband was in the other room because he was also working from home. I just said, I can't do this anymore. He just yelled out, just quit. So I did. I just took the leap and I just emailed her this really formal, boring, I, Erin Carey, blah, 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 resign as of this date. And then I just took a huge sigh of relief and literally have never looked back. And I read so many stories of people saying the same thing. It was the best thing I ever did. I don't regret it for a minute, blah, blah, blah. But I can say that is also true for me. It was the best thing because it really forced me to step it up. And then once I quit my job, it was like, a bow being pulled back and then launched forward. I grew so much faster without having that noose around my neck.
Yeah, for sure. Good for you. That's so amazing and inspiring to hear. I love that you just kind of trusted your abilities and, left the job that wasn't serving you anymore and are now working on your business full time, and that it's supporting your family on your travels. And so you said you're in Tunisia right now. I know you mentioned with the EU, you have to wait a little bit of time. And then you said you're going to Italy. Is that where you guys are spending the winter?
Yeah, that's right. So, being Australians, we can only stay 3 months in the EU, and then we have to get out for 3 months. So, we, if you have learned anything about my personality, is that I hate rules and that I always try and find a way to get what I want. So, while we were in Spain, we actually found out a way to get a visa extension. So we were able to stay in Spain for 6 months, which was amazing. So we cruised all the way up the coast and then spent a few months in the Balearic Islands. And then we had to definitely get out of the EU after having that time there. So the closest place to come was Africa. And we were looking forward to something completely different. And it is completely different here to Spain. You really couldn't get much of a different culture. And so we had 3 months to spend here altogether. We've got about 5 weeks to go. And then we're going to go to Italy because that's kind of this hub of where all the kids go for winter. Thank God there is something like that because, like I said, I don't know if my kids would last much longer otherwise. And it's in Sicily, down in Sicily. There's a marina there. So we'll stay there for 3 months. But also there is this little known bilateral agreement that Australia has with Italy that allows us to get an additional 3 months in Italy. So we're going to probably take advantage of that and maybe stay an extra month or two just so we can get through the whole winter season. But also we want to try and send the kids to school in Italy as well. So it's always kind of been a goal of mine is for my children to learn another language. And they say that if they're immersed in like the school environment, it's not unusual for them to learn a whole language in 3 to 6 months. So I'm excited that hopefully we can get them into school. I've been talking to the principal. And so in that case, they probably won't want to leave. But after the 6 months, we won't have any choice but to leave again. And then we'll probably go over to Turkey after that, or maybe Montenegro, somewhere out of the EU. Luckily, there are countries kind of like dotted within or amongst the EU countries. So it's not impossible. It's not ideal and it's a bit of a pain in the butt, but it's not impossible to do what we call the Schengen shuffle. It's just, it's not as easy as the Caribbean because in the Caribbean, you don't really have to think about this at all. You just kind of go where you want, when you want. Yes, some countries have limits. Some only allow you to stay there for 12 months, whatever. But Europe's obviously a lot more strict and that's just something that we've had to get used to since being over here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so if anyone wants to follow along with your journey, connect with you online, learn more about Rome Generation, where should they go to find that info?
Yeah, so you can check out my website. It's www.romegeneration.com. And that's obviously if you want our PR services. So like I said, we help travel, leisure and luxury brands. We help them raise brand awareness, increase their credibility and generate leads amongst lots of other things, help them kind of become the go-to people in their industry and basically get them lots of cool media articles written about them, which they can then include on their website and what have you. But if you want to just follow our story, my Facebook page is called Sailing to Rome. So sailing TOROAM. And that's the same for Instagram. And that's where you'll just see some stories and trials and tribulations of what it's like living on a boat with 3 boys and some photos of where we're at in the world. And otherwise, if you ever want to reach out and get advice or get like a pep talk or ask a question, people can reach me on admin@romegeneration.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time today, Erin. This has been such a amazing and inspiring conversation for us to have.
Thank you so much, guys. It's always a lot of fun reliving my journey and hopefully inspiring others to take the plunge and just get out there. And we didn't quite cover it, but honestly, travel right now is pretty much life as normal in all the countries that we've been to. So I don't think the pandemic should really stop many people. Obviously, try and be vaccinated if you can. It makes life a lot easier. But yeah, don't get put off because of that.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing that.
No worries. Thanks again, guys.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you want more, make sure to check out The World Wanderers Insider, available on Patreon at patreon.com/theworldwanderers.
For show notes, head over to theworldwanderers.com.
Find us on social media at The World Wanderers Podcast and join the private Facebook community at World Wanderers, a community for travelers.
You can always get in touch with us at info@theworldwanderers.com. And if you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It really helps us find new listeners.
See you next time.